PhD, the founding director of Da'at Institute. And Da'at is it's a bit of a Hebrew pun, I guess, or a play on words, because it stands for Deaf Awareness, Advocacy, and Training, and Da'at is also Hebrew for knowledge. An adjunct professor in psychology at Bryn Athyn College, and in private practice as a psychotherapist and spiritual director in Philadelphia. Ordained by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shaloni as a rabbinic pastor. You may be familiar with Rab Zalman, who was the founder of the Jewish Renewal Movement, and he is a member of Rabbis Without Borders Network and author of the groundbreaking Jewish Views of the Afterlife. His books, you can take a look, are available over here to peruse. We'll have them if you'd like to purchase and take home a copy tomorrow night after our Havdalah. And it is an honor to invite up Rev. Simcha.
Let's see if I'm live on the mic. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to be here in this very, very special building. A really nice vibe in this building. So I want to thank the architect who built this building. I want to thank Rabbi Bellis for inviting me here. I want to thank Ellen Goldman for your new annual committee for all of the background work, and thank Sheldon Kutnick for the opportunity to be here. And I want to thank you, because if you didn't show up, I'd actually have no reason to be here. So thank you all very much. Now, let me just offer a short overview of the weekend in case you don't read your congregational literature. So tonight, I'm asking the question, what do we learn from Torah that helps us deal with the reality of dying and death? And in particular, we know that some people go south in the winter, and Parshat Vayechi always falls in December and January, and that's when we read about Jacob's deathbed scene. So especially for those of you who missed that because you're in Florida at that time of year, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Tomorrow morning, if you're early morning holy roller, holy stroller, right? Stroller, right? It's the late night holy roller. We're going to look at Moses' death in Torah and Midrash. The highlight, whatever you do, don't miss it, is the brunch and learn, everything you ever wanted to know about Jewish views of the afterlife but never had a chance to ask. So that's a whole conversation in and of itself. And then tomorrow night we're doing Jewish ghost stories, which is a kind of fun way to share stories and continue the conversation about life after death in Judaism. So that's sort of what's on target for this weekend. But I want to start with a story. The story goes like this. Story told of Elijah the prophet. In medieval Jewish folk tradition, Elijah is really made into a miracle worker. He was actually a pretty fiery guy as a prophet, but medieval legend even makes a lot more to do with Elijah. A woman comes to Elijah holding in her arms a dead child, and on her face is the pain of only a mother who has buried a child can understand. And she says, Prophet Elijah, you are such a holy man. Can you please bring my child back to life? And he says, I will, but first you have to bring to me a loaf of bread from a home in which there have never been shed tears of grief. So she goes to the first house and says, do you have a loaf of bread here? Yeah, sure, we have a loaf of bread. Have there ever been shed in this home tears of grief? Well, as a matter of fact, when they invite her in and they share with her their story, and she shares her story, and she thanks them, and she goes on. Is there a loaf of bread in this home that you can spare? Yes, we have a loaf of bread. Have there ever been shed tears of grief in this home? Well, as a matter of fact, and again, they tell their story, she shares her story, and she goes on her way, and she goes on her way, and she goes on her way, and nowhere can she find a home where there have never been shed tears of grief. And she comes back to Prophet Elijah and she says, thank you very much, for you have given me the gift of my humanity. In my loss, I felt so alone and so isolated, but now I understand that I am very much part of the community of human beings who deal with this reality. So I want to start with that because I'm looking around the room, I can see that I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but nobody wants to talk about the reality of the fact that dying and death is part of the human condition. We live in this culture that is very, very much uptight. Today you can turn on Jerry Springer and Oprah and all of these network television programs, and everybody's talking about sexuality and sex and all those things, but nobody wants to talk about death. You know, it's like almost like an old Jewish suspicion. You don't come upon Molech HaMavis, you know. My teacher, Reb Zalman, he said he looked in the Brooklyn phone directory. Remember when they used to use a phone directory? And he saw a guy whose name was Molech Hamowitz. He said he wasn't going to call just in case. You know? So we don't talk about it, but it's very much part of our human condition. And again, and to set the tone, we're also living in a time when there are totally and profound new perspectives on dying and death. In 1900, Sigmund Freud publishes on the interpretation of dreams, and that begins the change of cultural transformations with regard to human sexuality. And it's 119 years later, and Lord knows we're still in progress. In 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the Swiss psychiatrist, publishes on death and dying, and that begins more of an openness in our culture around dying and death. You would have never had a scholar in residence on this topic, never mind 40 years ago, 10 years ago. But with things like the right to die, and the spread of hospice movement, and green burial, and families participating in funeral planning, and a long, long list, we are all co-participants and harbingers of a new vision. And so I'm a teacher who doesn't teach and then gives the homework. I'm going to give you the homework first, and then we'll talk. The homework is to continue these conversations in your home and in your family. I'm not just here to present you a couple of interesting things. Maybe there'll be some interesting things. I promise you there'll be a couple of good jokes. But really, the follow-up is both in your communities, in your family life, and also in the congregation. And I'm going to say something very specific about that in a little while. Okay, so that's sort of my throat clearing to begin the conversation. So you got your party favor already. Does anybody need need a text? Does anybody not have one? Have access to one? Okay, so we're rewinding the Torah to the end of the book of Genesis. It's Parshat Vayechi, and it's actually a very strange story in some ways. You hold on with the text. I promise you, you'll get to read it. I'm actually going to ask you out there, people out there, to read it for me. But here, the old guy is about to die. He had 2 wives. He had 2 concubines. His daughter was raped. Did they teach you that in Hebrew school? Right? And his son was thrown into the pit. It sounds sort of like what you're reading in the newspapers today. You know, but there's a lot here. Maybe this was his grandfather Abe tried to kill his father. You know, this was before they were talking about dysfunctional families. This one had some of those qualities to it. Or you can imagine a CBS miniseries, The Life of Yaakov. This is the final act. So to summarize briefly where we're going to pick up with this text, Jacob finally gets to Egypt. Okay, remember the kids went down there. Joseph goes down there. They bring down Benjamin. And eventually, Jacob shows up in Egypt, and he spent 17 years catching up with Joseph, being with his children, being with his grandchildren. And then he calls Joseph and gives him his last wishes about what he wants. He blesses the 12 sons. He chews them out. And then the grand old patriarch dies. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to ask, so what? So how does that help us think about the reality of end-of-life issues? And it turns out end-of-life is a more kosher word to use than death. So I won't talk about that. I won't talk about death, because we only want to use kosher words. So let's go to the text. Can I get a volunteer to read the first one? Somebody who's got a little Shakespearean quality in your voice. Ellen, you go. You were involved in setting this up. You get to do the hard work.
Okay. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, "If I found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh, and promise that you will show me kindness and faith. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my father, carry me out of Egypt, and bury me where they are buried. I will do as you say," he said. "Swear to me," he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff.
And then I'm just going to jump ahead and we'll come back. That when Jacob had finished giving instructions to his son, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. So the question that I have the mic, I get to ask the first question. What's going on here? What would you say is Jacob's attitude towards his own death? You're going to have to work tonight. I'm sorry. I know it's Shabbos, but he's reconciled, right? He's not prevaricating. He's not, shh, don't tell the kids. You know, the doctor says, the patient knows, the kids know, the wife knows, but nobody wants to talk to each other. He's very open. He has no fear. What we see here is Jacob accepts his own death very realistically, and he doesn't hide his feelings from his family. I am about to be gathered to my people. There's a complete willingness to accept his own mortality. And that is a very radical notion in our society. People don't want to talk about this stuff. How many of you would go tell some of your friends, "Oh, I'm going to a skull and residence on death and afterlife"? And they say, "What, are you crazy?" Right? I mean, when I teach a death and dying course, I send my students to go interview their families. And they say, "Why are you taking such a course?" So I see Jacob as a kind of model that we want to emulate. And so the question here is, what kind of modeling are you doing in your own families? What kind of modeling did you get growing up? Nobody's talking. See, that's what I mean. No one's talking. Please.
I got no modeling growing up. Death was never, my father died when I was 4, but after that point, death was never spoken about. My mother never talked about her death in years to come. But we do speak to our children.
Okay.
We talk about, we don't have long conversations, but we allude to the fact that what our wishes would be after we're gone. We want our children to always be close. Things like that. We don't hesitate to tell them these things.
And how many of you find when you want to have a conversation with your adult children, they don't want to talk to you about it? You want to say something about that? You just...
No, I just say that they like to pretend when they're getting any older and they're never going to go.
And some of you, I look around and say, you live too long to die young. My Auntie Rose used to say, everyone has their expiry date tattooed on their body. I have to watch what I say now because I'm in a synagogue, but I'm going to quote her exactly. She would say, "Mine's on my ass, I can't see it, and don't worry about it." To which I would say to her, Auntie Rose, is a good thing, because if you could see your ass from behind, you would drop dead. So I grew up in such a home. My mother was 10 years old when her father was killed in a car accident, and I grew up in a home where it was talked about. I'm trying to imagine that 4-year-old girl child kind of confused about what's going on. Something's going on for all of the adults. It's not business as usual on your 5th birthday, and yet nobody had the cultural permission to be able to talk about it. So what we're trying to extract from the Torah is really cultural permission to do it differently than the way in which our families did it. Yeah, please.
I think when I grew up here in this town, a lot of farms, and when you have a lot of agriculture or farming, you're used to seeing that quite often. And I know my mother always told us, before my great-grandfather died, and my grandfather died, she took us to see him and say goodbye.
Right.
It was quite.
Well, that's how it used to be. Then, you know, and in urban life, you know, you want to make sure you get off the turnpike or something before you have to pay your next toll, so you know, like you get to the funeral home quickly or something like that. It's been removed to the intensive care unit and to the funeral home. It doesn't happen in the public space anymore. But death doesn't only take place as an isolated incident. It takes place within the context of families. So somebody read the next passage, please, from 50:24. Yeah, you got it.
Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
So his Jacob's example of an openness with regard to dying and death rubs off on his son Joseph. And when Joseph's time comes, he also says, you know, I'm prepared to die with dignity. And so I remember when, you know, in my own family, when my maternal grandmother died, I don't remember a funeral, I don't remember Shiva. They told me she went to heaven, so I talked to her for 40 or 80 years in heaven. That's why I don't have the right of Jewish view of the afterlife. But I'll tell you about that one tomorrow. When my other grandmother died, I remember my two nephews were standing at the cemetery, and they're filling in the grave, and one nephew who was, I think they were like 4 and 8 at the time, went and says, hey guys, what are you doing down there? And my brother holds their hands and explains, so that's Bubby, and Bubby's body is being put in the ground. And so that was like 30 years apart between the first grandmother and the second one. And that's the change that is beginning to take place. But I want you to think about what were your earliest memories? And how did the adults around you talk about dying and death? And was that model helpful? And if not, what can you do to create a different kind of model? Because that's what Torah, we want to see our story in the greater story of Torah and use that in a way to deal with our own mortality in the same way that Jacob does or that Joseph does. So we're going to keep going on, but I did my homework. I have my notes, but I'm also, if anybody wants to comment, I'm glad to hear it. Please.
I can't help thinking, I didn't go to my first funeral until I was 21 years old, because everybody who died around me, it was like a big secret. Like, where are they? They're gone. It was like, you know, shock, 21 years old, you go to your first funeral, and like, what are we doing here? I'm happy that there is more conversation. With my children, there is, and my husband's children, we talk about it.
Right.
We've lived it. We've all, you know, lived it, and we decided we weren't going to do that anymore. But it was thinking back now, it was a terrible thing to hide from us.
Well, you know, I have to be very careful what I say because I'm a Canadian, so in this day and age, you know, I can get kicked out of the country. But we have to think about the founding of America, and you know, not the Pilgrims who we've kind of idealized and created this mythos, but the Puritans who came after them were very, very uptight. They didn't like Christmas. They didn't like Easter. They weren't so wild about women, about witches, and Jews. And anything messy about emotion was very much, not part of their comfort zone. The Puritans were the Taliban of Protestant England. They were kicked out of England for being too radical in their religiosity. And that kind of spirit infused itself into the early years of American life. Then when the Civil War comes, embalming comes into being. You know, this country does more embalming than any other country in the world. You know where embalming comes from? The Civil War. If somebody from Louisiana or from South Carolina dies in Gettysburg, they have to bring the body that were not refrigerated hearses. They had to put a body in the middle of July on a train to take him back down south. So there were actually guys who were on the battlefields competing to get the embalmer's business. You read a little bit. It's actually a fascinating chapter of death in this country. So this country, more than Europe, more than Moroccan Jews don't have the same problem. They have other problems, but that's a different story. Yeah, so you're right. We were pickled in the brine of a kind of American Protestant uptightness around dying and death. And it's not inherent in the Jewish tradition. Okay, well, let's keep going on. Somebody want to read Genesis 48, 3-4. He continues his acceptance of death. Yeah, please.
Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz and in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and will increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples, and I will give this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you.
And we do the next one. I want to make sure I get to the bottom of this before they pull the plug on me. So go on.
As I was returning from Haran to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan while we were still on the way, a little distance from Ephraim. So I buried her there beside the road to Ephraim.
So what he's doing here is a kind of conscious preparation for his own death. He's doing what Raymond Moody would call the life review. They talk about how at the moment of death one might have a panoramic vision of all of their deeds. But I've noticed that when people are dying slowly, it's almost as if the black box recorder goes on auto replay as they're dying. They say in hospice, Mrs. Schwartz is hallucinating. Mrs. Schwartz isn't hallucinating. She seems to be reliving the very, very early years of her childhood. And people have a need to tell the story. Have you sat down with your grandchildren and said, get out your iPhone and I want to tell you a little bit of my story? We have this great tradition of Jewish ethical wills, right? Where you sort of clear your throat and you write it down and then say, listen, give money to tzedakah and be sure to floss your teeth and be nice to your sister and that. But we also, these days, we have video ethical wills. That part of the work of a conscious closure is to pass on your story. And so we see in Jacob, he chews out some of the kids, he gives them a blessing, but this is what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross calls finishing business. And in some sense, like Yom Kippur is a way of clearing our slate. Every week on Shabbos, we have an agreement in our house. If we had a fight anytime during the week, we've got to let it go for Shabbos. It actually works very well. Shabbos has cut down on our therapy budget a lot, right? So, but there are some times it doesn't always work. Sometimes you need a little bit more. So to be able to think about who are the people that I need to say what I need to say to before I check out of here. What are the pieces of my story that I haven't gotten to tell to people? So that's what we see here from Jacob, is that he's remembering his life, both the good stuff and the difficult stuff. And he's remembering God blessed me, but he's also remembering the pain of bearing Rachel on the road to Bethlehem. And so we all have in our own stories the good stuff and the difficult stuff, and passing on the legacy is also sharing not only the good stuff, but how you dealt with the difficult stuff. That I was talking to my brother today, and he was in a dark space, and I said, my father's name was Harold. I just sent him a text saying, what would Harold say? Like, how did we learn from our father to deal with difficult times? Okay, so let's keep going on. Where am I? Okay, Genesis 49, 29 to 32. We have another. Yeah, please.
Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephraim and Hittite, a cave in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought as burial place from Ephron the Hittite, along with the field. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites.
So what's he doing here? He's making sure his estate is in order. You know, it's very clear. And what he models to us is making sure that all of the different pieces are put into place. Do you have a community cemetery here?
Yes.
Right? So that, you know, some people have that and it's easier. Some people, you know, the mess that people are left with when they move down to Florida, and their kids are some are in New York and some are in California, and you know, and so in California there's people who in Florida there's people who know them, but nobody knows their early history, and the kids go and there's nobody who knows the kid. You know, it's all of these things are very very complex today, and you know it's not unlike what Joseph had to deal with, because first they did the burial in Egypt, and then they took him to Canaan. You know, or first they did it in Florida, and then they took him back to New York to Long Island for burial, and you know. But this stuff brings up a lot of emotion. It's not just factually neutral. It's not just check my safety deposit box because that's where I have the plot. But these are important conversations. If you're living here, and I know some of you have a long-term history here, but have your progeny stayed here? You know, I'm from Montreal. The Montreal Jewish diaspora is all over the place. You know, I'd be cold if I would get buried in the middle of a Montreal winter. You know, it's like it's too cold. My wife's family is 4 generations in Knoxville. So, you know, but where are our kids going to be? So these are all very real kinds of conversations, and they're also community conversations. So here I'm giving you homework that after Simcha leaves, that you say, let's have a meeting and see, do we have the right kind of resources to support each other through funeral, through Shiva, through Chevra Kadisha, through bereavement. You know, it seems like a very warm and welcoming community, but do you have all of the resources to companion each other through the end of life experiences and journey? Because, you know, or organ donation, or living wills. Who doesn't have a living will? Good. Because, you know, my response would be, you live too long to die young, so you better have a living will. You know, but these days, even if you have a living will, the doctors can override it. The doctors can override it. So it's very important, again, to make sure that your family members know about those kind of things. Okay, 50, 1 to 7, and then 10. There's a little longer one. Somebody who's got... you want to read? No, the person behind you.
Joseph threw himself upon his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. When the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court, "If I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father, then I will return." Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father as he made you swear to do." So Joseph went up to bury his father. When they reached the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan, they lamented loudly and bitterly. And there Joseph observed a 7-day period of mourning for his father.
So what's going on here? What's this deal with the 40 days, the 7 days? Probably the word's not embalming, but mummification. Joseph because who he was in Egyptian royalty, arranged for his father to have a traditional Egyptian royal burial preparation. He didn't rush it. He didn't say 3 days and Shiva's over, I'm going back to work. Right? And then they did. Then when they went to a Todd, they did a 7-day mourning. What we extract from this is that there's an organic nature to the grief process itself. To everything there is a season, and you can't hurry grief any more than one can deny it. And so what we see here is that he's giving due time for the whole gamut of the mourning process. And with all due respect to what the Reform movement has done in America, a 3-day Shiva is still a contradiction in terms. I say to people, nobody's going to come. So even if you don't sit for the full 7 days, don't rush back because it's going to catch you. It's going to catch up with you later. Yeah, but it's okay. You're going to walk into the store on day 4 and you're going to be looking around and saying, wait, what am I doing in Target? I just buried my, whoever 3 days ago, and suddenly I'm trying to figure out what I need to be buying in the store. That the human heart needs some organic period of time. There's also something very interesting in this passage, the bottom 4 lines where he says, tell Pharaoh that my father made me swear an oath, quote, I'm about to die, bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Okay? So Joseph goes to Pharaoh and says this. Anything weird about that? It's a lie. Do you remember? It's a lie. Abraham didn't dig out the tomb. He bought it. He bought it. If you go back to Parshat Chaye Sarah, he negotiates with Ephron the Hittite, and he buys a burial plot to bury Sarah. But he's going to go to he's going to go to Pharaoh and say, hey, I want to bury my father in Canaan. And Pharaoh's going to say, what are you talking about? We have the best possible burial rites in the whole ancient world. You better go there. So he says, listen, I want to bury my father in the tomb that he dug out for himself. Oh, your father dug out his own tomb. Send that boy back to Canaan. So he actually has to distort it. It's very interesting. And when they get to a Todd, they send a whole retinue back up towards Canaan. And when they get to a Todd, they do this whole kit and caboodle there. What they're really doing is practicing an ancient Egyptian burial practice. The whole retinue, the way in which it's done, and everybody marching up there, that's actually documented in the text about how they would do a burial in ancient Egypt. But I think the important thing that we want to extract from this is to see the organic nature of grief. And again, it's that American sort of New England Protestant uptightness that you think if you forget it, it goes away. Somebody will say to me, I worked in a Jewish funeral home, and I did bereavement follow-up sessions with families. I called somebody, the poor woman was 80 years old, and she was crying after 5 weeks. My kids told me I should start dating, or whatever. They do that, not for the 80-year-old, for the 70-year-old, they still do that, right? And I said, how long have you been married? She said, 50 years. I said, it's not even 50 days, and you're giving yourself a hard time. You got to tell your kids to be quiet. It's okay. It's okay. So cultural permission around grief is what we get out of this particular passage. Okay. The last one. Somebody want to read the last text on the bottom of the page? I told you I was going to finish on that. Go. You get the last text. It's for you. You want to read the last one on the bottom of the page?
When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people.
Okay, so the image here for death is gathered to his people. In the language of the Hebrew Bible, Abraham, Isaac are gathered to their people. And when Moses dies, God says, now you will be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was. King Solomon says that he slept with his ancestors. So death in the language of the Hebrew Bible is to return to the company of one's ancestral families. And we see this in many places throughout the biblical era. Now, tomorrow we're going to begin the conversation about what Judaism has to say about life after death. But when you look at Tanakh, it's not like there's a particularly strong sense of immortality and separation of body and soul, and that kind of stuff actually comes a lot later. You get some stuff around resurrection of the dead, Ezekiel's dry bones, even though the Reform movement has made that Mechayeh HaKol, right? So here's the thing: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were Bedouins. Culturally, they were Bedouins. And any been to Israel, you've seen the Bedouin culture. So the Bedouins are. Do I have another mic here? No. There's the patriarch and the wives and the children and the camels and the goats, and they're all together one great big mishpocha. If you remember your sociology, it's participation mystique. They all sort of had this kind of communal involvement together. They weren't like, Dad, I'm really having a problem figuring out who I am. They didn't have those kind of existential anxiety issues, right? That wasn't an agenda. They were together as a family, and then when they were dead, they were together in the cave of the underworld with the mishpacha. To be gathered to one's people is to return to a kind of invisible realm of the ancestors. That was the way in which they understood the world beyond, and it was clearly, it wasn't beyond there, it wasn't about heaven, it was underground. So the word in Torah, Tanakh, for a living person is nefesh chaya, a living spirit. The word for a dead person is nefesh met, a dead spirit. When I'm with the family alive, I'm nefesh chaya. When I'm dead, I'm nefesh met, and I'm hanging out in the underworld that later becomes Sheol. And I got a good story for you about that later, tomorrow night. But there actually is archaeological evidence, not from Canaanite burial tombs, but from Hebrew burial tombs, where they would dig holes and they would put in foodstuff. They would literally feed the dead. There was, you got to send a sandwich along for the ride. And in our understanding, it seems a little bit strange, a little bit weird, but we need to sort of see that in that world there was a sense of a continuity of connection between this world of the living and the world beyond the dead. And we've weeded that out of our modern Jewish understanding, but when he says, I am gathered to his people, that's kind of the background to that. And then the near-death experience literature, which definitely adds a whole other flavor. They talk about somebody who's pronounced clinically dead, later resuscitated, they see their ancestors. So is that being gathered to their family, to their people? Or, when somebody is close to death, they're saying, oh, my father, my sister. People have those kinds of experiences. So there may be more in the Torah text than we previously understood around this topic, and we're going to pick up about that. So Jacob dies, Joseph dies, the book of Genesis ends, and then you turn the page and it's about the birth of Moses and the people in Egypt. So the story goes on. In a certain sense, Judaism affirms that there's life, there's death, and life goes on. And so on that note, I want to say good Shabbat to all of you, and thank you for this opportunity to be here with you today. Good.